Good evening, welcome. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for having us. My name is Johannes Doll, and I have the pleasure of presenting Orexo to you today. So who are we? Orexo's roots are in drug formulation, and the strategy has actually traditionally been quite simple. It's taking well-known pharmaceutical compounds where you know that they work and combine them with our proprietary drug delivery technologies. For example, our platform for making sublingual tablets. And thus you make better products. And that approach cuts out a lot of the risk that you would usually have with pharma R&D. And the strategy has been quite successful, as has been demonstrated by the fact that our scientists have been able to bring 4 products to market that are today sold and approved in most major markets around the world. The turning point in our history and what made Orexo a really exciting company, in my view, came with Zubsolv, a sublingual tablet for the treatment of opioid addiction, when we decided to transform what used to be a pure formulation house with no commercial operations whatsoever into a fully fledged pharma company and to launch Zubsolv through our own commercial subsidiary in the US. That was back in 2013. Now 6 years later, Orexo looks like a very different company. We're still Swedish. Our headquarters and our development functions are located in Uppsala. But actually, the majority of our Orexo colleagues are American today, and we generate by far the majority of our sales and profits in the US today. With Orexo and with our core asset Zubsolv, we find ourselves in what's probably the most severe health crisis in any civilized nation these days, the opioid epidemic in the US, where more than 5 million Americans are addicted to opioids. Could be prescription painkillers, could be heroin, and more than 70,000 people have died from a drug overdose last year. From a business perspective, we've managed to turn Orexo profitable for the first time in the history in 2016. We've been growing sales and profits since, and the good performance has equipped us with a bank account with more than 800 million SEK, which gives us a solid war chest to fund some of the opportunities that I'm going to be talking about. Our strategic priorities, this is essentially what we're coming to work for every day. We're clearly on a growth strategy. There's three priorities. We're working very hard and aggressive in trying to bring in more commercial assets in our US subsidiary. We have the infrastructure in place, which can basically serve as a platform to bring in more products. And if we succeed in doing so, we could bring in more sales without a lot of incremental operating spend, which from a valuation perspective, of course, would be very interesting. We'll be talking about that more. Secondly, of course, with a market that is growing double-digit and a patent protection until 2032, we're doing our best to further optimize our Zubsolv franchise. And we're also very excited that our internal pipeline is starting to take shape, and we actually now have both traditional pharma products in the pipeline, as well as we are venturing in the area of digital therapeutics, which I'll be talking more about. We tend to forget in Europe sometimes, but when you're in the US these days, this is center news across the board. As I said, 70,000 people have died from a drug overdose in the US last year. That's one dead person every 10 minutes. It's more than have ever died from car crashes, gun violence, or at the peak of the HIV crisis. And just to show how significant this is, life expectancy in the United States is going down today because of this. Life expectancy is going down. It's the only Western country where that is the case. And even in history, you have to go back to the US being affected by World War I and the Spanish flu pandemic at the same time. Otherwise, there was no period where the life expectancy has gone down, and now it's happening again with the opioid crisis. And the gentleman in the middle here, President Trump, has declared this a national health emergency, which means there has been a series of legislations already that are channeling money towards the problem and trying to improve access for patients to get treated, which, of course, if you're a company that offers treatment, is something you can only applaud. Last year, we did a little analysis, and we predicted that the number of patients treated with buprenorphine, that is the active substance in Zubsolv, our core asset, would grow 12% a year and double over the next 5 years. At least up until today, it seems like we've even been too conservative. So the market growth year to date has been 14%. And there's absolutely no sign of this crisis in the US slowing down. And as you see, there's still a large percentage of patients who don't get proper treatment at all. So how are we doing with Zubsolv? This is essentially the volume development since we launched, more or less the tablets we sell every week. The first thing you see immediately, this is not a smooth curve. There's quite a few bumps up and down. The reason for that in the US, if you're familiar a little bit with this market, the main driver of the business is market access. That means closing contracts with individual insurance companies. If you manage to close up a favorable contract with a large insurer, your volumes will go up. If you lose an important contract, your volumes will be down. And the second thing that you will probably immediately spot when you look carefully is that our volumes are trending down a bit over the last couple of months. And that has led to quite a few surprises when we published our Q3 report earlier in October. Because this is public information, so analysts could see that our prescription volume was going down. At the same time, we published the best ever financial performance we've ever had in Orexo, and we've beaten analyst expectations by far when it comes to profitability. So how can that be? We have to dive a little deeper to understand that. What's happened in the market is that the previous market leader and our main competitor, a product called Suboxone Film from Indivior, has gone generic. So there's now a few generic film products on the market, more competition. And what that has resulted in on the market access side is that 3 large insurance companies or payers, United Health Group, Wellcare, and Humana, where Zubsolv was the exclusive product before, have opened up to this new competition. So now, instead of paying for only Zubsolv, they also reimburse these other products. That has, of course, resulted in lower volumes for us, but for both Wellcare and Humana, we're actually better off from a profitability perspective. The reason for that is in order to get exclusive, you have to pay very high rebates. Now that we're no longer exclusive, we don't pay the same rebates anymore, and we've actually managed to keep enough patients on Zubsolv so that from a profitability perspective, we're actually better off. And then if you look at the remainder of the market, so this is basically everything outside these plants, where we are competing, we're actually growing quite strongly. And this is great news for us because these are the segments that tend to be very profitable. So in very simple terms, we're gaining where it's profitable, we're losing a bit where it's less profitable, and overall the profitability is looking very good. I could probably spend an hour talking about the market dynamics. In short, the generic entry has resulted in more competition, but there's also quite a few developments that could play out in our favor. For example, there's a push among public payers to open up reimbursement for all products in the class. Public payers means that the state is paying for the medical bills. That could be the case for Medicaid and Medicare, so for patients that are poor. Of course, there's a lot of patients who are poor if you think of heroin addicts, or if you're old or both. And what some of the states are working on or already have passed bills is to force these states to reimburse all products in the class. That is in response to the opioid crisis, to offer more choice and to be more effective in fighting this crisis. And that's, of course, great news for Zubsolv again, because the public segment is one that is very challenging traditionally for a branded product, because they have a structural preference for generics. So if the reimbursement opens up for Zubsolv, then our volumes will also go up. The second thing that is happening with the previous market leader going off patent, the first payers have started to block that product from reimbursement. Again, that could play out very favorably for Zubsolv, simply because we will be the last branded product that's still around. Everything else is generic, so we are the only ones out there talking to physicians and actively promoting a product. Let's have a look at our pipeline. We have defined opioid addiction as our strategic core, and all our pipeline projects are in that priority area, but we are defining opioid addiction quite broadly, so we're trying to attack the problem from several angles. One is coming up with better treatments for patients who are already addicted. Then we're trying to find treatments for all the symptoms and comorbidities that come with the disease, and that's a long list. And finally, we're also trying to make a contribution to prevent opioid addiction from happening by developing pain products that are not opioid and not addictive. We will get into these in more detail, but you will see that we have at least one project in each of these areas. So let's dive right in. OX124, OX125 are two projects that are trying to tackle probably the most visible symptom of the opioid crisis in the US, which is people dying from overdoses. Both are novel nasal delivery devices that are rescue drugs designed to reverse opioid overdoses, irrespective of what type of opioid has caused the overdose. There are rescue medications on the market today that are effective and save a lot of lives every day. The problem with these products is they were designed at a time when this was mostly a heroin crisis. That's unfortunately no longer the case today. It's a fentanyl crisis today. It's more people dying from fentanyl and other synthetic opioids than from heroin today. And the problem with that stuff is it's much more potent, it stays in the body much longer, and therefore is much more deadly. And already today for Narcan nasal spray, that's the current market leader in this rescue medication market, you see that for 1 in 3 patients, one of these nasal sprays is actually no longer enough to bring them back to life. So you need a second or sometimes even a third device. And there's also a real problem about what's called a second overdose. So you bring somebody back to life, they will typically not thank you for saving their lives because they will be extremely angry. You send them straight into withdrawal, which is kind of the worst state a drug addict can be, and so they will also not follow you to the hospital, but they will walk off. And by the time the naloxone, the rescue medication, wears off, they still have enough fentanyl in the blood to collapse again, and there's a second overdose. So what this market really needs is something that's more powerful and longer acting. And we were very happy to see when we tested OX124, our naloxone candidate in a human trial, that we were beating the current market leader in all of these dimensions. So we had faster uptake, higher peak, and longer duration. So we're quite confident that we will be able to really make a difference here. And if all goes well, we are hoping to file that product with the FDA in 2021. OX125 is a similar approach, just with a different compound, nalmefene, which inherently has a longer half-life. So it's especially important for the second overdoses. That is roughly following a year later. So hopefully we're going to be filing that with FDA in 2022. Next project, OX338. That's a novel sublingual formulation of ketorolac and the impulse for the treatment of pain, short-term pain after trauma, etc. And the impulse for this project was really that we're seeing for a lot of our Zubsolv patients who are already addicted, that their addiction journey really started the first time they were exposed to opioids. After a work accident, after a car crash, what have you, they get opioids, they get hooked and grow into an addiction. And the ambition with this project is really to develop something that is as effective as opioids in treating that pain for, let's say, 5 days after a car crash, but that is not an opioid and therefore avoids exposure to opioids and avoids the addiction from developing. And there, believe it or not, despite the crisis on all the awareness, there's still a lot of situations in the US where opioids are being prescribed where they really should not be prescribed. So there was a recent study among teenagers and adolescents who got opioids prescribed by their dentist, for example, because they got their wisdom teeth pulled. And within 1 year, 6% of these kids had developed and had been diagnosed with opioid use disorder, 6%. And this is where it's getting really absurd, because nobody should grow into a drug addict simply because they got their wisdom teeth removed. And it's exactly those types of situations where we are hoping to replace opioids with something like this, ketorolac, which is not an opioid, therefore avoid these kids being exposed to opioids and hopefully make a contribution in avoiding addiction going forward. So let's talk about our digital venture. More recently, we've closed a partnership with a German company called Gaia, and we will jointly develop a digital therapeutic for the treatment of opioid dependence. What you have to imagine is basically a virtual therapist that you can have a dialogue with on your phone, on your tablet, your PC. And what you need to know about that opioid addiction treatment, it's not just about giving medications, but equally important, you also need psychosocial support and you need good counseling. And this is actually a major bottleneck in this market, because despite being obligated to get counseling, a lot of these patients do not have access to proper counseling. And here we're hoping to make a real difference. Gaia has been developing digital therapies for more than 10 years, so they have a lot of experience. They've run multiple clinical trials with more than 10,000 patients. They have multiple products on the market already in Europe, for example, in depression, for example, in alcohol use disorder. And both the clinical trials as well as the real-life experience shows that these products are very, very effective, sometimes even more effective than pharmaceutical products. And that's actually not as surprising as it sounds. It's not so surprising, because in real life, there's a lot of differences in quality in the counseling. So you have bad counselors, you have good counselors. This Digital therapy is programmed to be a good counselor. That sounds very trivial, but it cuts out a lot of the inconsistencies and differences in quality. And even more importantly, there's an artificial intelligence engine behind it that basically tailors the treatment to each individual patient, depending on how the patient responds to the treatment, so you have the best possible outcome for each individual patient. At Orexo, we have very high hopes for that area. We believe in a few years digital therapies will be a fully natural part of medicine, and therefore we are not considering this as a little add-on business to sell more pills, like many pharmaceutical companies do, but we actually consider these products standalone therapeutics that can produce patient outcomes and really make a difference in people's life. So opioid addiction is the first of these digital ventures we're getting ourselves into, but it's definitely not the last one you're going to be hearing about from us. A few numbers. So these numbers are the last 12 months, including the third quarter of this year. We had 834 million SEK in net sales. That is mostly coming from our one product, Zubsolv. That's a decent growth compared to last year. Very profitable, so if you look at the EBITDA number on a company level, 229, that's more than double of the previous 12 months. And especially our US subsidiary is performing extremely well. So you see a 350 million of EBIT if you only look at our US operation. That's a 45% EBIT margin over the last 12 months. If you look at only the last quarter in isolation, it's even 51%. So that's very, very profitable if you think about that. We only have one product that we sell in the US that needs to carry all the cost. That has resulted in a very nice cash position of more than 800 million SEK. Even if you deduct our bond, we're still net cash positive with 500 million. And that, of course, allows us to go out hunting and try and get more products into our bag. So, a lot of reasons to believe in Orexo's continued success. First of all, we're operating in a market that is growing double digits, strong growth. There's absolutely no sign of slowing down. We're in a very strong financial position. We're very profitable, have a good cash balance to fund our operations and opportunities beyond that. We know what it takes to bring products to market successfully because we've done it several times. But for me personally, the most important reason to believe in Orexo and our ability to create value is the fact that we already have a fully fledged commercial operation in the US. So we have the full infrastructure there. It can serve as a platform. So if we are successful in the many deal negotiations that we are having, then we could potentially bring in a product, new sales, without incurring a lot of new operating spend. So we would enjoy that straight at the bottom line, and that, of course, gets very exciting from a value creation perspective. With that, I thank you very much for listening, and I'll open it up for questions. Thank you.
Tack så mycket. Thank you very much, Johannes. So how does it feel to have 800 million on the bank?
It feels good. However, what comes with that balance on the bank is, of course, the very imminent question: what are you going to do with the?
And that's your role, isn't it?
That is exactly my role.
You will have to spend this.
Yes.
How many companies do you look at per like month or half year or something like that?
Well, it depends on what you mean by look at. If you literally means look at and have a first discussion, that's easily hundreds of companies every year. Now, Orexo is a small company, so we cannot go a full due diligence and a full deal negotiation with 100 companies every year. That's simply not possible. But if I look over the last couple of years, there was actually no point in time where we were not in very advanced discussions with any potential partners. We've not succeeded yet in closing a deal. Most of the times we have walked away for different reasons.
Is it valuation or is it culture, or why do you say no?
So if I think back all the opportunities we've looked at, there's one deal that I would have liked to do that we simply didn't get for valuation purposes. All other situations we have been walking away after starting the due diligence, and then something comes up in the area of IP or manufacturing. Also, that was a red flag for us, and we walked away. And that's still something that's very important for us. There's a lot of pressure, of course, to get something done. It's our top priority for the company. So sometimes you get tempted to do a deal that you shouldn't be doing, but on that end, we are extremely disciplined and committed to only do things that make sense. But let me also say we've further intensified our efforts. I've just hired into my team a very seasoned business development professional in the US who's looking at this full time, and that of course gives us more bandwidth to entertain these discussions with different companies.
Can you give us some flavor of the many companies you have in DD process or LOI process stage when you're talking about? Can you in the later stages, how many discussions do you have ongoing right now?
If you look at, so there's always a series of discussions ongoing, but if you only look at full-blown DD and term sheets as discussed, and you're discussing a contract, our capacity is simply to not do more than one.
One or two
simply
times.
Because
it's too
we
much.
have one manufacturing team, we have one IP team that kind of have a daily business also. If you absorb them fully in a due diligence, then that's simply getting too much. So sometimes, unfortunately, there's more things to look at than we have the capacity to do. That's why we have now increased the capacity.
Cool. If you go back to Zubsolv, Orexo is one, I can just tell you, Orexo is one of the very, very few Swedish drug companies who has done like a greenfield to enter the US market with their own sales capacity. It was a really bold decision to do that, and you did really succeed in that one. So you're really happy to see that. So this is interesting. But how long time will you have the patent on Zubsolv now? You had a patent litigation for some months ago.
Yes.
Give us some background.
No, I mean, it's now easy to stand here and talk about the success that we've had, but it's been a desert work, and you're referring to the patent litigation where we had the largest generics manufacturer in the world, Stora Aktiedagen, coming after our main patent. And if you have one asset, that's of course not a good situation to be in. It was a long legal process, a lot of legal fees spent, but we won. So we have our patent confirmed, and that is valid until 2032. Of course, you can
2032.
32, yes. So that's another 13 years, which is quite unusual in
it's really long. It's really long when you're up and sailing.
Yes, and that of course gives us a much better planning horizon because we know that base business will be there. I don't know how much it will be growing or etc. There's a lot of dynamics in the market, but this base business generating profitability will be there, and that allows us to focus on taking the next step for the company and taking it to the next level.
But do you don't see any other competitor coming out with drugs in the same area where you are right now?
Well, so what we can probably expect is the number of generics players to increase, but we are already operating in a generic field. Yeah. You've seen that we've lost some volumes, but increased profitability, so that is something we can live with very well. There has been one of the first launch, I would say, of a new class of products. Indivior has come out with an injectable product. So our product is a sublingual tablet that you have to take every day. The idea with the injection is that you take it once a month, which medically makes a lot of sense.
You mean
Yes, you basically get enough buprenorphine for 1 month.
Okay.
You go to the doctor's office once a month, you get your injection, and then it's a depot formulation, so it releases over time. Medically makes all the sense in the world. The problem is in this addiction field, very, very few practices are set up to handle these kinds of products. So they're not used to a buy and bill concept where the doctor has to buy the product and then sell it on to the patient. There's storage requirements. It takes a long time between the prescription journey starting and the product actually being administered. So there's a lot of practical hurdles. In the first, I think, 1.5 years that they're on the market now, they're still below 0.5% or so. It's a good business because it's 10 times more expensive than our product. So that from a sales perspective, they're still doing okay. But it's not something that we consider a threat that will fully replace the tablet market. There's a Swedish company, as you know, also Camurus, that has a similar product. We've had a little of a bumpy bumpy ride. First got a complete response letter, and then now are blocked currently by data exclusivity from Indivior. They're trying to fight that.
Complicated business.
It's a complicated business, yes. But of course, I mean, what this space needs absolutely is more treatment options. So it's not like we are happy about somebody not coming to market. Also, it's a fast-growing market. Patients need choice. There's different patient segments, but we don't see this base business of daily treatment go away
in the foreseeable future.
Well, unless somebody comes out with a really revolutionary treatment, which could be for example, a non-opioid replacement therapy, that's currently not on the horizon. So I'm not going to make predictions until 2032, but from what we can tell now, it's not going away. No.
But you're talking a lot about the US all the time. How's the growth in the other areas in the world?
Yes, so the reason I talk about the US is that that's the only market where we have commercial operations, so we have out-licensed all our products outside the US. When you talk about opioid addiction, it's a global problem, not to the same extent that you have it in the US, but you also have the problem in Sweden, you have it in Germany, you have it in all of the European market. Australia is one, Canada another one. From a market opportunity perspective, however, they are coming nowhere close to where the US is. And that has got to do with the number of patients, of course. That's got to do with the price level, especially in Europe. And it's also got to do with the choice of treatment, that it's much more fragmented in parts of the world that is not the US. In the US, it's very clear that buprenorphine, the naloxone treatment, which is ours, where we fall into that class, is the gold standard. Methadone plays a much smaller role. In Europe, that's not the case. You have countries that prefer methadone. You have countries that use buprenorphine, but they don't want the naloxone component in there. So it's a much more fragmented market and more difficult to build a business. And it's not a situation where one product like Zubsolv can support a full commercial organization. So that's why we've not built up commercial infrastructure outside the US. But of course, a partner who's already in the space can take it on.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Okay, you can like SMS or Twitter or whatever. So whatever. One thing that we have had two companies now under equity research. One is Wilson, and the other was New Evolution. Who is, from our perspective, they're taken out from the market. It was a very nice bids on the companies and premium bids and so on. Do you get like these of offers?
For Orexo to be bought?
Exactly. You don't know?
It does happen, of course, but we have our internal projections from a valuation perspective are quite bullish, simply because we're not done yet. We've had some success with Zubsolv, probably more than most people have thought, but we are absolutely committed to take this product this company to the next level. So if somebody comes along and bids a crazy price, then maybe we will entertain a discussion. If somebody comes on a market cap plus X% usual premium, that's not interesting for us, because simply we believe we can create more value on our own.
So what do you think is do you have any threats right now, or is it just sunshine, or what's the problem do you face?
I think if it's just sunshine, then you've not done your homework usually, no. Or if it looks like just sunshine. I'm quite confident about the market and the development and so forth. I think there's a bit of a risk, of course, around being a one-product company. Not that I see any immediate threats for Zubsolv to go away, but if something happens to Zubsolv, that's basically all we have for now, which is, of course, why we're working hard on diversifying the portfolio. Otherwise, threats. If we don't find good ways to apply the money on the bank account, that would be on us, I guess.
Well, why don't you just do a dividend instead?
Yes.
You must. That's a really logical way to handle the cash situation.
Yes. So our responsibility as a management team, of course, is to bring proposals to the board of directors how to invest the money and come up with good deal ideas of funding internal development, etc. Of course, the board will consider that in comparison to giving money back to the shareholders. But that's board of directors' decision, of course, that I cannot speculate about.
But in your business plan, in your business plan, you must calculate with high returns than for the shareholders in the long term.
Yes.
Exactly. So can you say anything about when do you think that you can release the next acquisition or the first acquisition in there?
Well, we're constantly working on that. Of course, one of the big mistakes you can make in our position is to publicly talk about something that hasn't materialized yet, because that usually leads you to do stupid decisions, which we're trying to avoid. But of course, if you look over the next couple of years, if we have not managed to bring in additional products, then we would be very disappointed. Absolutely.
Thank you. A great company. Great presentation. Thank you.